Welcome to our epic ocean, where critical solutions to a planet in peril are brought to the surface. Our epic ocean celebrates all that is epic about the ocean and why it is the planet's most vital resource. And now to our host, Rich Gurman.
Hey, this is Rich, and welcome to another episode of Our Epic Ocean. So there is a must-see new documentary for anyone who loves both humankind and the planet, and it's called Tribes on the Edge. And I was able to watch it the day that it came out, and I'll tell you, it was equal parts heartwarming and also heartbreaking. But it's 100% real and very important, and it's an honor to have the expedition leader, the director, and the producer of the film as my guest today, Céline Cousteau. Welcome to Our Epic Ocean. How are you?
Thank you. I am doing well, Rich. Thanks.
I'm so glad you're here. I know you must be super busy with the film coming out and everything else that you're working on, so it's an honor to get to spend this time with you and have you share with our audience. So thank you so much for that.
Well, I'm happy to share. I mean, storytelling is what I do, and the film being out in the world for me is really important. So I'd love to accompany it on its way and on its journey.
I love it. So my first question is, you were clearly born with salt water in your veins. How did a mermaid like you become so absorbed by and fascinated by the rainforest?
Well, I think I was born with probably a fin on one foot and a hiking boot on the other. So I'd like to be on both land and in water.
Yeah.
I'm cause agnostic. I believe in all causes. And so whatever it is that I get passionate about is what I end up working on. And the places I go to determine some of that. I first went to the Amazon with my grandfather, though, when I was about 9, 10 years old, and spent 2 weeks aboard Calypso navigating the waters of the Amazon at a time that not a lot was known.
Mhm.
And so that introduction to the Amazon is where it all started and was where my relationship with that place began. I didn't know what that was going to lead to. Obviously, I think at 9 years old, you're not really conscious of your future. But yeah, it definitely created a connection, at least with the Amazon. And the oceans, I mean, the oceans, yes, there's salt water in all of our blood. But because of my family, it was just always very present in my home and around us.
As a 9 or 10-year-old, was the connection that you felt or remember, was it with the beauty of the place, or was there any connection with the people at that young age?
You know, at that age, my son just turned 9, so it's a good time for the observation of what that's like as an outside
Mm,
witness. But when you're nine,
yeah.
10 years old, you're living the moment. You know, you're sensing things. You're feeling sand underneath your feet. You're remembering emotions. Everything's new. I mean, especially in the Amazon, everything was just really vivid for me. Um, I remember moments. There's almost like visual flashes, like you would have of a dream, of going off in the canoe with the scientist who was he was collecting piranha to study them. So we would have to bring them back alive to put them in the aquarium. And so he was like, "Oh, Celine, come with me. Let's go find some piranha." I was like, "Okay." And I'm sitting in this dugout canoe and, paddling. And then he throws a piranha at the bottom of the boat. And I just remember the moment the piranha is like splashing at the bottom of the boat and I pull up my feet. Those are the memories of a child. It's not
Yeah,
the intellectual understanding of how the people have changed and how the forest is moving and the biodiversity, and that comes later.
for sure. So the movie, correct my pronunciation if I say it wrong, but the movie tells the story of the indigenous people. Is it Vale de Javari? Am I saying that right?
It's in Portuguese, Vale do Javari.
Oh,
You can say the Javari. It
I'll
works
never say it
fine.
as good as you with that French accent.
I, French accent speaking Portuguese that I learned with indigenous people in the jungle.
So the movie tells the story of these incredible people living in the heart
Mm.
of the Brazilian Amazon. How did you first discover these people and their plight?
So we went in 2006 and 2007. My father and his team at Ocean Future Society were creating a documentary called Return to the Amazon. It was part of a series for PBS called Ocean Adventures. Not all ocean adventures start or end in the oceans. Sometimes the ocean is in the middle.
Right?
We went back to the Amazon 25 years after my grandfather and his team had been there to document what had happened in terms of the ecosystem, climate change, in terms of the indigenous people. And one of the locations we went to is the Javari territory in Brazil. It turned out that because I have an interest in human stories, I have a background in psychology and a master's in intercultural relations, I got put on a lot of the logistics and the planning for everything that had to do with humans. Because I speak Spanish, even though it's not Portuguese, I was also in charge of things that needed those language requirements. So we went to the Javari with the intention of going into the Métis tribe. And the reason is that that's who my grandfather had seen 25 years earlier. The Javari territory is home to 5 contacted tribes, 1 in transition of contact, and the largest number of uncontacted people in the entire Amazon. So just to kind of set an idea that when we say the people of the Javari, we're talking about a lot of different ethnicities. When I was there in 2007 with my father's team, my brother was there as well, we were actually able to attend a meeting of the indigenous peoples of the Javari territory. And during the time we were there, this is a village in the middle of the jungle, in the middle of their territory, what we heard was everything around their health issues. Mm-hmm. And that's when I found out that about 50 to 80% of them have some form of hepatitis or multiple, because there's A, B, C, and Delta. And this is much like in the time of the 16th century colonizers coming from Europe. These are diseases brought in by outsiders. And so hearing that they have a disease that is preventable and treatable for the most part, but that the government was actually pulling out support and funding, it was heartbreaking. They were dying and begging for help, and what they were told is we actually are going to bring less support. When I left, I knew I wanted to do something more. I just didn't know at the time what that was going to be.
So this was 2006, is that what you said?
So 2006, we started filming, but 2007 in the Javari territory. Yeah.
And when did you start filming the movie?
So my film, I started filming in 2013.
Oh, wow, that long ago.
Yeah, it was a while ago. 2010, I get an email from Beto of the Marubo tribe from the Javari territory who wrote me and said, "We want you to tell our people's story. We want the world to know we exist." And I said yes. It took me a while to gather funding and time. And in the meantime, I also had my child and I had other projects. Sure. So we started filming in 2013 and we went back again 2014, 2015 to finish filming.
Incredible. So we'll get more into the plight of the people and what's actually happening there. But I want to talk about the people themselves first, because just watching the movie and seeing your connection to them, that was the heartwarming, obviously, side of it versus the heartbreaking. What do you love most about these people, the people that you have spent time there, Beto, and just everybody that you've encountered there?
I never come back from the Amazon the same as when I went. And sometimes they're just very simple lessons that I'm taught inadvertently. There's no huge moments of teaching. You sense it when you're there. I'm just grateful for that. I'm grateful for their ability to, in essence, trust me with their story. It's not about welcoming. It's not like, oh, there's a big party. It's just they know that I'm there because they asked me to come and that I'm taking their story to the world. And so there's kind of an opening that happens and a trust that usually takes a very long time to build up. That trust has built up from 2007 till now because I've stayed steadfast in my conviction that I can do something. But I'm always grateful when I come home because I realize several things. One, I'm fighting for something that's worthwhile, and that's human life.
Yes.
And I can make a difference, and they trust me to tell their story. So there's a huge value in that, in understanding my role as an Indigenous ally and understanding throughout all of this time what that really means. Two, I'm really lucky to have what I have. And whatever suffering I feel I may be under is nothing compared to what they have to deal with on a daily basis. So perspective and gratitude for what I have without the guilt that I'm able to have clean water or have access to healthcare. but understanding that that also means that I have the ability to do something more for other people, and they have given me that opportunity.
Mm.
Um, and I think to realize that we have an opportunity to help, we have an opportunity to create change is a privilege, and a privilege to honor on a daily basis.
100%. There must be this. I remember you saying in the movie that when you're home in France, there's a
Yeah.
part of you that's always in the rainforest, and when you're in the rainforest, there's a part of you that's back at home with your family. That there must be an extreme contrast between being there with these people, living this simple life, and being pretty much unplugged from the outside
Mm.
world, and then coming back to the quote unquote real world, and all of our silly first world problems. What is that contrast like?
It's hard. Honestly, it's easier for me to adjust going there than it is to coming back.
Yes.
Um, because, and it's not a simple life, but it's a life that's really in touch with all of the realities of existence, right? Where it's like if you want to eat, you need to go hunt or you need to work the garden. You don't. You're just like, oh, oops, I forgot the butter. Go to the corner store, right? So you really are in touch with everything that this planet is about. When I come back, and it's hard being there. I mean, it's hot, it's humid, it rains, it's buggy. It the subject is heartbreaking, as you said earlier.
Yes.
The circumstances are difficult. You don't know if you're going to get to your destination when you're in your boat. You don't know if you're safe. Um, and all of that awakens these senses again. I keep repeating this. When I come back, I'm just like, oh, I could just start my car and drive. And there's almost something, and it's not a criticism of the world in which I live, but there's something almost too easy and banal about it, where we start looking for problems to complain about, right? We start looking for those things that are wrong.
That's a great
There's
point.
really, yes, life is difficult, period. Because if you are a thinking, sentient, conscious being, you will see the hardship in the world. But the reality is that's an opportunity to do something about it. So when I come home, I have less patience. I admit I have less patience for the small problems. At the same time, it's perspective. People's problems are real because they're theirs, and I respect that.
Mm. Wow, there's a lot in what you just said. I feel like perhaps the greatest spiritual lesson that is in pretty much every spiritual text is learning to be present and live in the moment. And it sounds like when you are there, even though like you're saying, it sounds like it's a simple life, but not an easy life that they have. Simple in
Mm.
terms of it's we need to eat, so let's go find food. They're focused on basic things, living a very hard lifestyle based on what's going on with them. And then you come back to, like I said, the quote unquote real world, and it's easy to take things for granted, and like you said, get frustrated, and you're out of the moment. You're in your head, and it's the thinking part that pulls you out of the moment. Where my sense of it, not having spent time there, is that focusing on basic needs creates a simplicity and less thought. It's like, hey, we need to go find water, we need to find food. It's just a completely different reality, and that's why I asked about the contrast between being there and being back home. Um, One thing I found
I
super
need both, Rich. I mean,
you
my
need both.
reality is that I need both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, isn't
It's
that the key to find the balance of
yeah.
being in touch with our nature, being in touch like I have a hard time if I go more than a day not being like if I'm in Laguna Beach, California, right on the beach. And if I go inland for more than like a day, like
Mm.
I want to say the word need, it's a strong word, but like I need to be near the ocean. I need to be on the water. I need to be in the water because that's where I go. I always kind of, it sounds like a oxymoron, but the ocean is where I get grounded. And so if I
Mm.
don't have that, so it's kind of what you're saying, we need that balance, right?
Yeah, and I don't think grounded is too far from an ability in the water. I mean, it goes down to the ground at some point, but
True.
um, I think we tether ourselves to sometimes superficial needs, and we get distracted quite easily, which allows us to live in a system that's created around us, right? I mean, I have two of these,
Yeah.
and I'm on a computer, um, but it doesn't make my life any more important that I constantly am attached to this and communicating and doing, right? Um, at the same time, it's a tool. How do I utilize that tool, right?
Correct.
Do I use it to just make never-ending videos about what my hair is doing today, or not to criticize because I look at the hair tutorials as well. but but I think it's what you do with those tools. It's just like anything. And, I feel that if we are able to get grounded, whether it's in the ocean or on land or in nature or up a tree, then we come back with perspective. And we don't have to go to the Amazon jungle to do that. We could go out if you have access to nature, you have access to that feeling. I encourage people. I mean, I've been told that a friend of mine was doing a tarot reading. I didn't ask for anything. I was in the waiting room. And this woman came out and she goes, "You." And I was like, "What?" And she says, "You need to take your shoes off and walk on grass." And I said, "Okay." Just like these messages coming at me. But I think everybody does. I think everybody does. It's just that we learn to survive without it.
And I would add to that, like we say, well, this is nature and this over here is not nature. And I say, no, it's all nature. The entire planet
Yeah.
is nature. And I think we forget that. So, yeah, you don't need to go to the Amazon and deal with everything that you've dealt with. Thank God that you did. And you're bringing this message to the world because it's so important. But we can do it wherever we're at. So, one of the things I found very interesting about the movie was that my guesstimation is about 85% of the movie was about the people, unfortunately, essentially being decimated by the Brazilian government. And there was very little on the impact that destroying the rainforest is having and will continue to have on the environment. There was only a little bit
Mm.
about that, which I found real interesting. And I'm wondering, was that, as I was watching, I was like, oh my God, I need to ask her, like, was that a conscious decision?
Yeah, I don't know about but you're spot on in terms of the major part of the film was around the human story.
Yes.
Um, I also I didn't want to be in front of the camera. I didn't want there was no reason for me to be there. But all of my mentors, filmmakers, editor, really said it's important for me to tell my story because I have a personal connection with this place. They asked me to come back to tell the story, and that I acted as a bridge to bringing in the audience to make it more palatable, more relevant to their lives. The intention was to focus on the people, to make them as accessible as possible to the audience. I don't want to say humanizing them because they are human, but
Yeah.
making them accessible emotionally. The, there's too much to tell in one film, and it's really hard because I mean this is the thing. You go out. I shot 100 hours of footage, and we came back and we have a 78-minute film. Um, and I still feel we've left so much out. What about this scene when this woman is singing? What about this? And oh God, we didn't talk about climate change. We didn't talk about disappearing biodiversity. We have to make choices in storytelling, and that's the choice I made because they are the story. But you're right. There is a much bigger story to tell, and I say it in simple ways because I didn't want the film to be a lesson about like the how to, the what to, and
Sure.
I didn't want people to feel guilty either. Um, but Indigenous people are natural guardians of these ecosystems. And if you look at Indigenous territories, there's actually less deforestation on Indigenous land than there is on conservation land. So if you look at that, you're like, oh, the old thought of conservation was no people is better for the environment. It's not true. The presence of Indigenous people actually creates a better system for the protection of the rainforest from outside threats. However, if those outside threats are not properly dealt with, then they become a threat to human life. And that's what we're dealing with in the Javari.
Yes, unfortunately. You gave me chills when you say that because the thought is if the people are all gone, the
Yeah.
rainforest. I mean, they're just the land. They're just going to destroy it all. It's
And
just
and
heartbreaking,
there's no doubt that that will be the result.
and that's the goal. Sounds like, and we'll get to that because the way I really the way you ended the movie, we'll get to that in a little while because I want to talk about the very end. But let's talk about the people more. So your work really expresses that interconnectivity between the humans and the natural world. And I just want to hear more from you. Why is this so important to you personally?
Well, I think for a long time we have thought that we're damaging, we're doing all of the harm, and yes, but we're also doing good. And if we start shifting our focus, it's much like wake up in the morning and think positive thoughts, smile, even if it's sometimes a little hard. Take deep breaths, all of that sort of meditative work or consciousness work or just presence
Hmm.
actually shifts the positive energy of things. So, what if instead of constantly pointing a finger at the negative, we said, okay, here is a challenge, here is a problem. What is the solution to that challenge or to that problem? Who hasn't created the technology to help support and protect? Who has created the laws? Where are the grassroots organizations? Who are the natural defenders? I think that viewpoint, you're always going to see the harm and the negative. But if you come at it from a solution, then you start looking at the possibility as opposed to, oh, this is a really difficult place to be. Yeah, it's difficult. What are we going to do about it? Why humans in the environment? Because I think if we don't make that connection, it's always going to be the environment's over there and we're over here. Of course, we need the environment. I mean, we can look at it on a very simple basis. If you breathe and you eat, you need the environment. Full stop, right? So let's say, even if you come up with the most amazing, indoor hydroponic or multi-trophic aquaculture, land-based, all of this stuff, right? If nature's gone, we don't breathe. 20% of our oxygen comes from the Amazon. 20%, that's one in a fifth breath. So try taking 5 breaths and holding that last one and never exhaling, or just never taking it. No life. And so for me, it's just like, the environmental story is the human story. The human is at the center of this, because at the end of the day, we can talk about species extinction and we can try to save species, and I'm 100% for it. We have to do everything to avoid extinction.
Hmm.
But what about our extinction? Because we're the only ones that have the choice as to whether or not we go extinct. We have the knowledge, we have the information. What are we doing with it?
Well said. So I love that you're focused on solutions. That's what really the premise of our show here is, creating solutions for the challenges that the Earth is facing. With the film itself, what's your goal for the film? If you could just lay it out, like this is why we made it, and this is what we want.
I wish I had tangible, because I get asked all the time, what can I do? I'm like, okay, there's a couple tangible things. Most people aren't necessarily satisfied with it because it doesn't solve all the issues in the film.
Okay.
The goal of the film is to tell the story, and that's been frustrating for me for a long time because I always want it to be more than that. The indigenous people asked me to tell their story. That's what I'm doing. And I vowed that as often as I can to whoever will listen or not, I will continue to tell this story. And that's what I'm doing. I've told it through jewelry design. I've told it in conferences. I've told it as an ambassador for an organization. I tell it through film. I tell it in conferences, because that's what they asked me to do. And Beto Marubo, who originally was the one who sent me the email and asked me to come to the Amazon to start the project, I came I was Baltimore, Maryland, New York, DC, and he came with me to show the film. And somebody from the audience said, Beto, tell us what we can do. And he said, keep telling this story and tell it as if it is yours, because it is.
Mm.
And I think there's power in that, because we are at the base of it. We're all storytellers. Back in the day, it was around a fire. Hopefully still in the day, it's around a fire. When we were able to travel and take holidays not too long ago, we would come back with stories from our holidays. You might come back with a story from a swim in the ocean and you witnessed something. We're all storytellers, and that's an amazing way to connect. That said, it's not enough for me. There's a lot more we can do. We have created a whole educational curriculum. Well, we're creating an educational curriculum, but I've been reaching out to students for the past 2-3 years, using these platforms that we're now so familiar with during this heavy time of sitting in front of our computers. But we were able to reach 7,200 students in more than 46 countries, in half-hour sessions, just chatting about this subject. We're now building an educational curriculum with William and Mary University out of Virginia, to address the issues from the film, but in a context that is more global. We're also creating action initiatives where we've been spending the past year working on the strategy to look at how do we analyze the biodiversity of this territory and the threats to that biodiversity. So we're working with AI companies and all kinds of on the ground technology and sensors to be able to understand what biodiversity is there, what's threatening it. So those are
Very,
that's the continuation of the film.
very good. So the story kind of sets the table. That's the
I
awareness
like that.
piece, and then the rest is the education leads to the action that hopefully can create change. Is that a fair way to
Yes.
put it? I love that you talk about
Yes.
storytelling. For you don't probably know this about me, but for the past 12 years, I've paddleboarded here off the coast of Laguna Beach, and I've documented our dolphins, and we have more species of dolphins and whales right here off the coast of Southern California
Mm.
than anywhere on the planet. And I've been shooting photos and video of these animals. Either we have dolphins that live here year round, we have some that visit in the winter months, we have gray whales that are migrating through right now, we have blue whales that come in the summer. Like it's amazing. And I've never felt I think we're very similar in that just documenting this, telling that, showing that story, it's not enough for me. That's why I created this podcast. I'm like, wait, we got to focus on solutions. We got to do more. But I don't think, maybe I don't give myself enough credit for just the storytelling part and creating that awareness. But I'm like you, like, no, we got to do more. We got to do more. So that it's helpful for me to hear that from you.
Yeah, it's our desire to be actors and not observers. I think there's people that are happy to be observers and witnesses, and there's others that need more, either for your own psychological reasons of well-being and feeling like you're contributing and not taking. Um,
Mm.
but don't underestimate the power of images. I mean, it's what we live on, and especially nowadays. How do you make that as compelling as the content that's much more accessible, right? Because you're now entering an algorithm, and your beautiful images of these sea creatures are not entering the algorithm the same way other things are, but people need it.
They need it.
um, and they do, they need it. And it's up to us, and I haven't figured this out yet, but it's up to us how to be more present in the places where everyday people exist, and offer them what we have as stories in a way in which they're going to want to um, absorb and digest it. And I think that that's a puzzle to solve.
For sure. So speaking of the story that you told, I got to ask, did you feel in danger not only making the story, but now that the movie's out, knowing the forces that don't want that story to be told, did you feel in danger there? Cameras rolling?
Thank
Who's
you for bringing
watching?
that up. um, Luckily, I live in a tiny little town in France. I don't think that they're going to come for me here, but um, I didn't feel in danger with the people that I work for, which is the indigenous people.
Sure.
I didn't feel threatened in any way, even though there was an incident in 2007. It's funny, I hesitate to say these things because I feel like people might judge them. Very simply put, we had nothing to do with any kind of hostile situation, but they wanted to keep us hostage. This was in 2007. Not anything to do with us, but because the outside world wasn't listening. And this will stick with me forever. They said maybe if we keep them, the outsiders, will pay attention because their lives are worth more than ours.
Whoa.
And and what that did for me, one, it made me really angry that the world exists believing that somebody's life is worth less or more. Um, and it convinced me that I wanted to do something more. That that the very people who had thought keeping me hostage would bring them more attention from the people that they needed support from made me want to help them. And because it wasn't hostile to me. And and I never felt in danger. I actually didn't, I learned about it after we had left the territory because one of the indigenous chiefs had negotiated what we didn't know was letting us go. Um, and I went back, and the first place I went back to was the same village where that happened. And reason being is because they called me back knowing that I had access to an international platform to tell their story. So I didn't feel the danger, but it's important to share it because one, I realized how unaware I was in that
Yeah.
moment. I had no idea that the guy we were waiting for an hour to get on our boat to get out of there was negotiating our release. Um, Two, things aren't always what they seem, and if you only listen to the eccentric or the wow part of the story, you miss the point. Um, there was another moment and it's in the film, so you saw it, where we had an unfortunate encounter with a venomous snake. And I will entice people to go watch the film to see what happened. But what that taught us is that, again, we're not infallible, and the lives that the indigenous people lead in the jungle, you're on constant edge. It's why the film is called Tribes on the Edge, because it's not them, it's the human tribe, if that wasn't obvious. But we are on constant edge. We just don't always know it, and we're vulnerable. And vulnerability can be a good thing if we respect it. Um, so yeah, that's kind of the danger thing. It
So
could have been worse, but
let's go.
yeah.
I got to go back one story. Thank you for sharing the story about the potential hostage situation. And it almost brought me to tears to hear that, but it sounded like it was a cry. It was a cry for help. It
It
wasn't.
was, yeah,
It was like they're not. They don't give a shit about us, but they're gonna care about if we hold this white woman. Someone's
yeah,
gonna pay attention.
yeah.
That's
And
that.
it's heartbreaking, Rich. It's heartbreaking that somebody would feel that. They would they would be at the point of desperation to do something that is not in their nature to do, because
Correct.
they want to live. They don't want to die. They don't want to go extinct. That's what pushes people to desperation. We see it in all kinds of societies, whether it's, theft or aggression. It comes out in anger. It comes out in abuse. When we don't live a balanced life, and now I'm talking more esoterically, but when we don't live a balanced life and a balanced inner life, it's got to come out somewhere.
Oh, for sure.
And when our lives aren't respected, what do you do? What do you do so people hear you?
Well, look at I think that speaks to what's going on in the world in general right now. Like the madness that's going on, especially in this country. It's just this in anger and rage that people don't know how to express, they don't know how to heal, and it just comes out. And so I there's a the optimistic part of me hopes that this is actually a good thing. Like it's in there. We all have it's the light in the dark. We all have it. Let's let that darkness out, hopefully in a more controlled way, and learn to heal it.
Mm,
So,
yeah.
if you didn't have you like it would be impossible for you to treat these people the way they're being treated because it's just not in you. It's not who you are. But clearly there's a lot of people in this country and around the world that have a lot of anger. So let's
But I
go.
think we have choice. I mean, so ancient indigenous wisdom coming from North America, and you probably know this, that we have two wolves within us,
Yeah.
right? The dark wolf and the light wolf, and the grandson who asks his grandfather, but how do you know which one you are? And it's the wolf that you choose. And so, I think that if you have the opportunity and the ability and the space to actually think and ponder, because it's wow, taking a step back. I mean, there's not a lot of people in general that have that that privilege. It's not even ability. It's just like you're busy trying to make a living and feed your kids and do this. And if you're on survival mode, like, you know,
No, we need to create that space.
to create the space. But if you take a step back and you realize like what's important, then I think you are a healthier being and you treat others the same.
And I think it speaks to the power of film.
Hmm.
The more good content like you're creating, putting out to the world, especially with, we talked about technology. I've always been someone that actually feared technology at some primal level because I'm like, oof, if I'm so addicted to this phone, it's going to take me away from the present moment. It's going to take me away from my core nature. But then the flip side is, well, we can utilize this technology to get messages like yours out to the world in a bigger way. So the optimistic side of us, I think, has to look at it that way. I was going to ask you this before. How many people are we talking about? And not just in the Javari region, but maybe map it out for us, the different indigenous regions, and using this is the fact that you would use the word extinction of a
Mm.
species of humans is it's reality, but it's a scary one. Like, how many people are we talking about in Brazil?
So I don't have numbers for you as far as Brazil wide. The Javari territory has 7,000, about 7,000. So, and I'll explain why. So there's around 5,000 people that are within the contacted tribes, and they believe there's about 2,000 people that are uncontacted. And that can only ever be an estimate because they're uncontacted. There's not a census. You
No
don't go door to
census.
door counting. Excuse me, how many children? Um, so they do. There's flyovers either with small Cessna planes or helicopters, and they look at the size of their homes, and they estimate about how many people that holds. Um, so 7,000 people might not sound like a lot because it also covers 85,000 square kilometers. That's the size of Portugal, Austria, or in the United States, the size of Maine. So
Wow.
that gives you an idea of the extent of the territory, the number of people, 5 contacted ethnicities, 1 in transition of contact, and I think there's about 12 or 13 uncontacted groups, different groups in those 2,000 people. So it gives you an idea of these are all different cultures, different languages, different ethnicities, different ways of being. Um, and the idea of extinction, I mean, when I had somebody look me in the eye and say, we don't want our people to go extinct, it, it has to sit with you for a second and let it absorb. We're not talking about, and for all I feel for all animals, we're not talking about just a dolphin. We're not talking about a fish. We're talking about human beings, and it can't go unfelt. You don't come back from that.
So we're gonna shift eventually in this conversation more on solutions, but let's just stay on this path a little longer. 'Cause I mentioned before how you end the movie. Um, you end it with a gut-wrenching quote by the
Mhm.
president of Brazil, basically saying that if he has his way, he would completely eliminate the indigenous people. Um, I'm kind of curious why you chose to end on that note, and then the question is, how do we retain hope in the face of such evil and ugly forces like that?
I ended on that note because that's reality, and in and we all do this. We all do this in conversation. We filter. We think about what we're going to say, how we say it. Film is the utmost example of that because we spend hours in the editing room choosing, what goes where, and 100 hours of footage. You have a 78-hour film. Um, I thought about ending in a more up note and kind of leave the audience lifted. This is not a lifting story. This is real. And maybe it's why it's hard to get to distribution as well, because it just is what it is. I didn't try to make it fancy. I tried to bring you into the story on a very personal note, which I don't usually divulge sort of my inner side in film. But if I'm asking the audience to be open and vulnerable, I have to be. Um, and I ended on that note because I started filming before the current Brazilian government was in power. And Bolsonaro may be saying what he says, previous governments were acting on it anyway. So it's nothing new. It's just the person we had in front of us is actually overt. And so you can use a quote that is shocking. Um, and there were plenty more. There are plenty more things that were said um, that could have been in there. But to want a people to disappear, it's pretty intense.
It was very intense.
Yeah, but it's not all doom and gloom. So I don't want us to stay in this deep dark place because it's easy to get bogged
Oh
in
no, that's what
there.
I'm saying. We had you have to go there, or else
We
what's the
do.
point of the conversation? And we're gonna uplift it. But I just when I was watching, it was just that was the last feeling I was left with, and it was like
Mhm.
it's hard. Like I said, it's heart wrenching. But then it's like, how do we? Where's the hope in that? How do we? Let's. I love. You talked about the educational programs and things that you're focused on. So we'll move into that direction more. I actually do want to shift to the environmental impact of all this. So, um, the first question there, and this might be basic to some people watching and listening, but why is the rainforest critical to having a healthy planet?
Well, I mean, in general, just a balance in nature is, right? Too much of anything. It's like too much sugar is no good. So balance in our ecosystem. The rainforest, just the Amazon rainforest in and of itself creates about 20% of our global oxygen. So just on a planetary level. If you want to, and these are simplified terms, scientists will want to break it down further than that. If you look at just globally, oceans are producing 50% of our oxygen. Land plants are producing 50% of our oxygen. You start taking all of that away, it creates an imbalance in the system. If we think of the planet as a body, if your body is out of whack, you're going to feel it, right? Your gut is going to feel it, or maybe your liver is going to kind of go, or you're going to have a hard time breathing. Same thing. Biodiversity in the Amazon rainforest is plentiful. The Javari territory was actually declared irreplaceable in terms of biodiversity by the IUCN, the International Union of Conservation for Nature, which is one of the reasons why we want to do a biodiversity analysis and actually understand what's there. Biodiversity is like the flora in your gut, right? If it's out of balance, everything goes out of whack. If you take out the predators in the ocean ecosystem isn't healthy. If you take out the base of the food chain, then there's no food for the rest of the ecosystem. It's all about equilibrium. I was talking to somebody earlier about this, and it was interesting, this idea of like the brink of extinction. You can get close to the brink of extinction and then actually spend decades bringing that animal back. But then there's a tipping point. And the tipping point in the Amazon rainforest isn't that far away. And it's not about there's still so much of it. Yeah, there's still so much of it. 100%. There's still a lot of rainforest. That's not the point. The point is at a certain point of deforestation, it just tips the scales and there's no return. We're already seeing changes in the seasons. We're seeing droughts in the rainforest. When I was asking, when should I bring my team in on expedition? The answer over the years, 2013, 14, 15 was, Céline, we used to be able to just tell you to come in May or in June, but we don't know anymore when the rainy season starts. These are people that live in complete rhythm with nature because they depend on it, right? They're not looking at a calendar and wondering like when the longest day of the year is. They just know. And they know what living sustainably in nature means because that's the only way to live out there. And when they're telling me they're not sure anymore, that from a few years, they're not sure when the rains are coming, so they can't really tell me like what season is best. You start to think, you're like, wow, we're not paying attention to that equilibrium anymore. Like I'm having way too much dessert and I'm not realizing like what's happening in my body.
Yeah.
Same thing. It's the same thing.
So, from what you can tell, how close is that tipping point?
I don't want to say because I'm not a scientist or an expert, and unless I have that information, I don't want to deliver it. But what people are saying is pretty alarming. And I quote this person often. Lonnie Thompson is a glaciologist that we interviewed in 2006 with my father. We were exploring the Quelccaya ice cap in Peru, which is the Quelccaya ice cap and the Coricalis Glacier, which is the largest tropical glacier on our planet. And I asked Lonnie Thompson, and in regards to climate change, we're talking about all these melting glaciers and the melting icebergs, and your positive energy is waning. And I said, Lonnie, is it too late? Like, what can we do? And he says, unfortunately, human beings don't react until their back is up against the wall. And he says, when it comes to climate change, that's just too late. So we need to be preventative and we need to be proactive. There are preventative measures. There's a lot of reforestation projects. Totally 100% believe in them. I also believe in the prevention of deforestation, and that's what we're trying to do in the Javari. You can take it to any subject, right? So if education is a prevention for poverty, we need to focus on education. Don't just think that you can put a Band-Aid on poverty. Education has been proven to be a solution to poverty, right? Prevention of deforestation is a solution. Let's focus on that. On an individual basis, open up your cupboards, right? Plenty of information online as to what is harming ecosystems. One, palm oil. Let's just take that one, not to make it the only bad guy. Look at all the products in your cupboards and see what has palm oil in it. Palm oil makes your Nutella creamy. That's really all it does. It doesn't really add any nutritional value to it. Can we eliminate palm oil? Because palm oil is a major destroyer of tropical rainforests, not just in the Amazon, but other places. Asia, Borneo. That would be something people could do. Eliminating single-use plastics. We've heard this one for the past couple of years. It's become very popular. We've been trying to do that for decades. So those are solutions that everyday person can implement.
Very good. So, big picture, and kind of, I want to tie this into our focus here is a little more ocean related, obviously. So, to me, the ocean, the rainforest, and you've been saying a lot of this threaded through the whole conversation. Humans not only surviving but thriving. It's all related, right? It's all the same. And just like nature knows what it takes to find balance and harmony, I feel like humans need to either find that balance and learn to live in harmony with ourselves, with each other, and the planet, or the planet might just get rid of us. And the people in your movie embody that harmony, yet their fate, as we're saying, is in the balance. What do
Yeah.
you feel, big picture wise, it's going to take not only to protect them, but to protect the mass of humanity?
Mm. I don't have an easy solution for you, but I go back again. I have wise people in my life who deliver messages, and I have a friend, filmmaker, years and years ago, and he said to me, do you understand what your work is all about? Oh, I'm doing this and I'm doing films and da da da. And he goes, no, 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 the bigger picture. And he said, Celine, you're shifting human consciousness. That's what you need to remember. And so it's not an easy topic. It's not tangible. There's some people who don't believe in that. It sounds esoteric. But until we shift our way of seeing ourselves in the world, it's going to be really hard to keep fixing things, um, because a lot of people aren't going to believe in it. And I don't want to like run around and try to convince everybody how much it matters. But it does. I mean, it matters for our survival. We're seeing it now, and I don't want to focus on COVID-19, but here's a virus that has impacted the entire planet. Well, we can see how connected we are now, right? This one little thing, the world is on pause.
Yes.
If that's not an example of how everything's connected, I don't know when we're going to wake up. Um, this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity for us to see what our place on this planet is and what really matters to us. I've, you know, I travel a lot for work, and this past year I haven't. And my friends called me up and said, "Are you okay? Are you doing all right?" I'm like, actually, I think it's delightful. It's hard. I don't like wearing a mask every day, but I'm psyched my kid's in school. I don't like that the restaurants are closed, but I'm grateful I can go to the supermarket and buy food. And I'm grateful that I don't have to travel as much to do my work, because it was detrimental to me to have that many hours on a plane. It was detrimental to the planet. It was a conflict. So again, there's not rose-colored glasses, but it's, seeing the opportunity.
I love your answer for a couple of reasons. I think it was maybe around last April when the pandemic really just kind of changed,
Mm.
stopped the world, to your point. I made a statement that was that this is Mother Nature's whisper. Let's not make her scream. Like
Mm.
let this be a wake up call to
Yeah.
change how we take care of ourselves, our immune systems, and things like that. So I still believe that, and I got to tell you, you gave me chills when you talked about that. At the end of the day, the work's about raising consciousness. Um, a quick personal aside: there was a pretty long period of my life, maybe around 2008, where I thought that my path on this planet was to be a meditation teacher,
Mm.
and that was my way in the world of helping to raise the collective consciousness of the planet. Because when I looked at, well, what's the answer to all these problems, that was the answer given to me by my teacher at the time. And then it never felt like I didn't never felt it in my gut and my soul that that's what I was supposed to do. It felt like an ego, like, oh, if I'm going to put myself out as this
Mm.
spiritual person, meditation teacher, it felt like for me too much ego in there, and that led to my life shifting to be just a deep love affair with the ocean, creating this crazy connection with the dolphins and whales, and now I've been it's been crystal clear to me over the last few years that doing the work that I'm doing as someone who documents the dolphins and whales and shares them, as someone that creates this platform to share the messages of amazing people like you, this is the way I'm going to help to raise the consciousness of the planet. And what's interesting, every single interview that I've done, and I never purposely took it in that direction, but every single amazing person I've talked to, including yourself, has said the same thing. You know, when I like, what is the answer? It always relates back to elevating the consciousness of the planet to the point where, like, if we reach a certain point, then we will just naturally begin to make better decisions for ourselves, for each other, for the planet. So you gave me chills on that one. So thank you.
Rich, can I ask you a question though? Do you think you had to go through that process of believing you were supposed to do it a certain way in order to come back? Or do you think that no matter what you would have done, you would have followed now the path that you're on?
Oh my gosh. What's interesting about that is it was a very painful thing. I had this meditation teacher, not necessarily a guru, but it wasn't like a guru disciple relationship. It was more teacher and student.
Mm.
And he and I had this massive falling out, which led to, we could have an hour-long conversation just on that. It led to this long period of disillusionment with all things spiritual, and I could barely even meditate anymore. And that's what led me to going out in the ocean, and that's what led to the ocean really becoming my kind of I still call it like a moving meditation, being out on the water and paddling and seeing the beauty, and then the dolphins show up and the whales. And you know, I've said for years now that people ask me if I communicate with the dolphins. Do they give me messages? And as I always say, as much as I would love to say yes, they do. They tell me this, they tell me that. They don't. I don't. They don't tell me anything specific. But what I notice is when I am with them, I am fully in the moment. I am
Yeah.
not thinking about what happened yesterday. I'm not thinking about what I have to do later today. I'm fully in the moment with them. And like I said a while back, is that not the greatest spiritual lesson, learning to live in the moment? So yeah, it was a long process that I went through to get to here. And I feel blessed. And actually this leads me to where I want to go in the conversation, because I think most people maybe never figure out why they're here, why they're on this planet,
Mm.
and what their true soul's calling is. And when it came clear to me about 6 years ago now, what my purpose was, like, I had to shift everything in my life to follow that. Like, I felt like it was my social, moral, spiritual responsibility to basically spend the rest of my life doing whatever. For me, it's about the dolphins and whales, to do whatever I
Mm.
can to protect that ocean so that the dolphins and whales are safe. Will we all benefit as a result of that too? Absolutely, but that's really
Yeah.
the core of it for me. So let's not turn this into you interviewing me. I want to keep the focus on you. But I
But I
gotta
was curious because everybody has a path, right? Everybody has a path to where they're going, and we don't always know what that path is. We think we think we're going over here because that's where we're supposed to go,
right.
but you have to go here in order to get there. And I find it fascinating how people get to where they are when they have this moment of like, oh, I'm supposed to be doing this, right? So I don't think the shift in consciousness is a maybe a goal. Maybe the goal is the journey to the shift in consciousness because you don't know when it's going to happen or how it does. But if you, I don't know, I throw myself at projects. I think when you do that, you start to realize you're like, oh, I'm so passionate about this, but it was actually to get over here. Oh my, this is where I'm supposed to be. Um,
It's not a linear straight
oh
line
no,
out there for sure.
no way.
Can we talk about your family a little?
Yes.
Thank you. So, first, your parents. I'm curious how they inspired you. Did they paint a picture for you to follow in the footsteps of your father and your grandfather, or do they encourage you, Celine, just go, find your own path, find your own way? How did that happen?
There was no picture painted for me. There was an open door to whatever questions I had or curiosity. Obviously, a lot of people remember my grandfather, but I equate him with the tip of the iceberg, and the rest of 90% of the story is below the surface. Um, and my grandmother is a huge influence. She was aboard Calypso and on expedition more than anybody in my family combined. And seeing her as a woman aboard the ship and really a key element in enabling my grandfather to do what he did is what I grew up with. My mother was an expedition photographer for some 13 years. She would go off for 3 months at a time. When there were no cell phones, there was no FaceTime, WhatsApp, and Signal and every other method of communication. It was just like, all right, mom's going away for 3 months and she'll call when she gets to a hotel. My dad was always working with my grandfather from as far back as I know. So it was just, I was surrounded by this. It's like saying like, oh, my family has a dentistry practice, right? It's just what's around you. I was never told I had to do anything. I was told to try whenever I was doing something to do my best at what I was doing. That's the message I have. And I don't remember somebody saying it. I just remember that feeling of, okay, you're choosing to do this, go for it. There was never any opposition to my studies in psychology or working in a psychiatric hospital. There was never any opposition to studying art. Hesitancy because I kept changing my mind, but I've acquired a lot of different skills. But it was always around me. And so it's like being in water, Rich, you know this, when you're surrounded by it, you can't help but have it infiltrate your cells.
For sure.
It's
Yeah.
what happens. And it's why being in water is such goodness. And so, after doing my studies and working, my father was doing the Ocean Adventure series for PBS. I had been working in tourism as a tour guide and regional director for this company in Canada. And so I was good at logistics and production. And I was like, oh, you're in the field. Do you need help? And it was really with the idea of like logistics and production. And very quickly it was like, okay, you're doing the interviews with the whale scientist. And I was like, I don't know anything about whales. What am I going to ask? But I think that was the point, is that I was comfortable in front of the camera. I'm happy juggling a whole lot of different responsibilities. And I'm curious, like I want to know from the experts. I'm a generalist, like tell me stories, give me information. So I was asking the questions that the public would probably ask. And I loved it. I loved being out in the field. I loved collecting stories and bringing it back and having these amazing adventures with a great team of people that ends up being your extended family. So it was just part of it. I think all of it are pieces of a puzzle. There was no one moment.
Very good. But how about this? You have obviously a deep empathy for the planet, for nature, for humans. Where did that come from?
I think I was just born with it. I think it's also why I stopped working in a psychiatric hospital, is because sometimes it's too much for me. There was adolescents who were telling me stories of abuse, and I would just leave. I would leave the hospital so angry at the people that were able to do that to their own family members. So that empathy is just kind of all in my cells. What I'm learning to do now is I'm learning to protect myself, because I am completely porous, and so everything that's happening, it comes in, and I don't want to be different than what I am, but I have to learn to let some of that go through me so I'm not so impacted. It's also what made me tell the Tribes on the Edge story the way I did. It's also why I get carried away in everybody else's causes, and whenever I hear somebody with a problem, I'm immediately computing a solution. I think it's just innate.
How do you create that porousness? Is that a word? I've always said that we need to create like this emotional suit of armor. I've also always said that our greatest strength is also our greatest weakness. And sometimes for me, I feel it's being so damn sensitive. So we feel so much, which is great, but we feel too much sometimes. So how do you create that?
The advice I got, because I asked the question, I said, how can I make it stop? I said, how can I create a shield? And the answer that came back was, you can't. You have two choices. You either learn how to let it go through you, So literally, if you can imagine, kind of standing. I tried this once with a toxic person, um, and I stood there. I was like, I'm gonna try this, and I literally stood. I can't do it because I'm sitting, but with my palms like this and my feet, just kind of standing firm. And I was like, I am going to mentally create a space through which this toxicity can go, and I'll give that person the space to express what they need to express without letting it harm me. It's work. It was work for me in that moment. But what this person said, and he's a healer, but what he said to me, he says, you have two choices. You let it go through you or you walk away.
Very good.
I have a lot of guilt around walking away because I feel I'm here at the service of others. So I have to work on not feeling that guilt and basically saying, right now I don't accept what you're giving me, or right now I can't handle what you're giving me. I'm not equipped for it at this moment. Whatever the words you need. And I'm learning how to let it go through me because I want to fight good fights, good battles until the end of my days. And I want to be healthy, in my mind and in my body. And in order to do that, I need to figure out how to keep intact my empathy, not try to not absorb, but learn when to protect myself.
Yeah, and not let it destroy your own personal happiness in the process. Well,
Mm,
that wouldn't benefit anyone, right? So it's fine to
no,
have balance.
I'm grumpy when I'm not happy. When like
You're
I'm
not
grumpy
happy when
around
you're not
toxic
happy, is
people.
what you're saying? I'm so unhappy
I'm
when
not
I'm
happy.
miserable.
But Rich, getting back to your thing about getting in the oceans, like Wallace J. Nichols.
I interviewed him a couple weeks ago. Yeah.
There you go. And Blue Mind.
Yeah.
I really feel like some of the things we feel in nature, he explained it. So if anybody wants an explanation of like why being in, on, or near water is incredibly healing, read the book 100%. But you can also just sense it, right? When we submerge in water, we're like, okay, the world's okay again. Um, I think that's we need to prescribe. We need to see all these doctors, and we need to prescribe nature as a medicine.
It's the best medicine.
Mm,
I love a few minutes ago that you brought up your grandmother and your mother as huge influences. I didn't
yeah.
realize that they'd spent as much time out there doing all the amazing stuff that your father and grandfather did. So obviously they were a huge influence, and clearly your grandfather is probably the chief, most well known person of your family, and a huge influence. How did he specifically inspire you to not only do what you do, but really be the person that you are?
He had this incredible ability to just convene people, right? He had that kind of natural charm, and it wasn't just his French accent, which I have to say, because I grew up in the United States, and although I speak French at home, I don't have the accent. People ask me all the time, why don't you have the French accent? I'm like, because I was educated in America. It's just- um, he what he inspired in me, and this is what I love, is that people all over the world tell me, Cousteau, like Jacques. I'm like, yes, just like that. I grew up with your grandfather. I'm like, so did I. What I love about it, and I never get sick of it, is that he shows that one person has the ability to unify.
Mhm.
And you can unify around a story, you can unify around a thought, you can unify around a project. And I feel that that inspiration is engaging. I admire that he was able to do that the world over. There weren't as many channels of media and distraction as there are today, so perhaps he had the advantage of, at least in France, 3 television stations to choose from. But he was also a pioneer and an explorer. I think now when people ask me, do you consider yourself an explorer, or they label I never know what to call myself, by the way. They're like, what should we put as your title? I'm like, I'm a verb, I was told, not a noun. And so I think about that, and the word explorer comes up, and I'm like, I don't know that I consider myself an explorer. I don't go to like the farthest reaches of Antarctica. I don't hike up the biggest mountains. I don't go into the deepest caves. I think exploration for me is much more about an exploration of self within the environment in which you find yourself. Who are you in the Amazon? Who are you looking at a whale in the eye? Who are you standing in the middle of a city? Who are you at dinner with a bunch of people you don't know? That's an exploration I'm interested in.
Me too. I love it. Thank you so much. I love this conversation. This is so fun. I love that you said a
It
minute
is
ago
fun, isn't
about
it?
you're fun. I love that you talked
More fun
about
is good.
more fun is good. More fun makes us happy. Um,
Yes.
the line about unifying and also um, that one person can make a difference. We have some strong beliefs here in our within our brand of all things Epic Ocean, and one is about collaboration that we need to work together. So that's to me
Yes.
speaks to unifying, and then like you said, that one person can truly make an impact. And so I think as we somewhat wind down here, I'd like to move to solutions.
Mm.
Um, what advice can you offer? What can our listeners do to make a difference in their own lives? You mentioned things like decisions we make with plastics and palm oil, specifically to your mission with
Mm.
the indigenous people. What can we do? How can we support what you're up to?
I would say first and foremost is educate yourself on Indigenous issues, Indigenous struggles the world over or close to home, because you'll always find something. I think it's really important first to start there, and to not make assumptions that you can just throw a check at an organization and call it a day. That has value as well, so I don't want to turn that down. But I do think that understanding what it means to be an ally to a cause, it took me a while to be able to embrace that and say it. I am an Indigenous ally. And what that means is that when I can, I stand for them. And they have strong voices. I'm not replacing their voice, but I get invitations to talk. And so I bring their voice with me. And how is it that I can share that voice? Um, that would be one. So educating yourself about Indigenous issues, understanding why they're related to you. In general,
Watch Tribes on the Edge. That's a good starting point, right?
watch Tribes on the Edge, and you'll see one story that unfortunately is also a global story. And I say unfortunately for the heartbreaking part. For the heartwarming part, thankfully, it's a global story. Um, so that would be one. Two, if you have the means to support organizations that are working on advocacy for Indigenous people, all continents involved, that are working on, you have legal organizations that are helping defend Indigenous rights, and land rights. All of that is worthwhile to not underestimate, even though what I just said is don't just think you can throw a check at it, but please do, because the people who are working hard on the ground, need that support. It's just a fact. And I always have a hard time asking for that support for what we're doing. Tribes on the Edge, as you mentioned earlier, we're doing educational programs. We have our action initiatives that we haven't put online and accessible yet, but any donations that come in are tax deductible and will go right back into the project. If you rent or buy the film, our part of the profit goes right back into the project. So all of that is really helpful.
Beautiful.
And then, yeah, open up your cupboards, instruct yourself on your consumption. Consume only, buy only what you need. Don't waste. Don't use single use plastics. Be kind to others, be respectful to others. That goes a long way. I think that's all part of the action plan as well. And choose your cause. I don't think people have to get involved in what inspires others. Find what inspires you, because if you find that, you will do that every day. It's tough to wake up every morning and feel like, okay, one more day that I'm going to take this battle on. I can do this. I can do this. You're not a lone warrior, but sometimes you find yourself in solitude fighting these fights. So if you really believe in the cause you're fighting, you'll do that every day, no matter what.
Yes, I love this. Very, very well said. Speaking of what you said a moment ago, are there actions that can be taken to get Human Rights Watch or the UN behind this assault against humanity? Is this already happening? What can you tell us about that?
I mean, I don't want to get too political, for a lot of different reasons. And some of them were evoked in the conversation. Um, Human rights organizations, yeah, in general. Brazil is a tough place to work, because environmental and humanitarian defenders often are not most favored by the government. And we risk our lives even by having conversations about it. Um, so, yeah, put good energy into what you do. And I'll just leave it there because
Okay.
it's a complex one, and ending on that one is gonna is a really tough one.
Good point. We promised we'd end on a high. So,
We
Celine,
promise. There are great high notes, Rich. We've touched on a whole lot of them, and what I hope through these conversations is that that's what people, go deep, go dark, and then come back up because there's always a way out.
got to come up for air, right? Um, I love this conversation. I had very limited, as you know, exposure to you on a personal level before this conversation. So I, from my heart, appreciate you opening up your heart and not only letting us into the story that you tell in the movie and a lot about your life, but really letting us into your mind, your heart, and your soul, and what's important to you. So, from my standpoint, this was a beautiful, wonderful, enlightening experience. And on that note, I will give you the final word. Any final thoughts you want to share?
The final thoughts. Yeah, believing in our ability to shift, and even if it's scary, just go ahead and take that first step because you'll realize that you're capable of it.
Very good. Celine, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rich.
Thank you for being a guest. Thank you, everyone, for being here.